Hello everyone. This is the second installment in our topic, Introduction to Administrative Law. Remember our objectives for this unit. I'm hoping that by the time you're done, you'll be acquainted with the job structure and typical activities of government regulators. You'll know a little bit about the rules of the road that they have to follow, what lawyers call administrative law, and then you'll be able to use that to sort out stories about government action into the more important and the less important ones. And I hope you'll be able to use this context to fill in the gaps in stories about government agency action. When you hear about government taking some kind of action, I hope you'll be able to, for yourself and maybe for those around you, be able to fill in the gaps and say something about who the players are and what are the likely actions that they're going to take. Understanding that context will make you a better predictor and evaluator of government action. So that's what we're after. Here we go. We've already talked about the where question. Where are the regulators in the institutional sense? What is their institutional context? But now I want us to think about who are the regulators. Now, the institutional location, that where question, did tell us some things about the incentives and habits of regulators. But in addition to that, we can also learn a lot about their likely behavior if we know something about how these folks got their jobs. So we'll be focusing on the career path for individuals who are working in government agencies. Where do they come from? Where do they go? Sounds like the words from Cotton-Eyed Joe. So we'll focus on the federal government, and we'll start at the top of the agencies. Up at the top, for the political leadership of each of the regulatory agencies, the way you get that job is the president appoints you, and then the Senate gives, quote, advice and consent. Ultimately, the Senate has to sign off or vote on these high-level appointments. The number of people who fall into this category have really grown over the years, so there were 280 positions along these lines in the Kennedy era. There are more like 1,400 today. Some legislation from 2011 trimmed the list back a bit, but it's been a growth area. So that's how you get the job. The president appoints and with Senate advice and consent. How do you lose the job? Well, most of these jobs are removal at will by the president. The president can, for any reason at all, come along and say, you're out of this job, we're going to put somebody else in there. President doesn't need the Senate to sign off on any firings or removals. That's completely the president's call. An exception is what we sometimes call the independent agencies. There are a few of these agencies that Congress has created that said, all right, you get the job leading an independent agency through the normal presidential appointment, Senate advice and consent, but we're going to try to restrict the president's power to remove people from the independent agencies. So for those agencies, the president can only remove somebody for just cause, and judges are there to, standing in the wings to enforce that and to make sure that only appropriate job-related malfeasance, misfeasance is the basis for it. It's not that the president disagrees with policy, it's So what are the effects of this appointment and removal process? Well, one of the effects is policy coordination among the different executive branch agencies and accountability to the president and therefore ultimately to the voters. The voters don't vote on the head of the EPA or the head of the Department of Labor, but they do pick a president, and the president picks the heads of the agencies. So this is a way of connecting the voters to the work of the agencies. It also is a way of making sure that one department is, that the departments are running more or less in the same direction, that one department is not undermining the other one. Now, of course, that happens sometimes, but The fact that all the heads of the agencies answer to one president, and a president who has, one, we hope, coherent set of objectives means that there's a little bit more policy coordination among the departments because of this method of placing the leadership at the tops of the agencies. Now, in addition to policy coordination and accountability to the chief executive, to the president, you also get the effect of attentiveness to the current Congress by regulators. The people who are in the departments are highly aware of what Congress right now wants. This is a little bit odd because we normally think of the agencies as carrying out the will of a past Congress, the Congress that passed the statute that the agency is now implementing. For instance, chunks of the EPA are implementing the Clean Air Act of 1990. So they should be very tuned into what Congress 1990. But the reality is they're also very tuned. There's one other more recent effect of this appointment process that involves the Senate, and that turns on the idea of the filibuster. The Senate, functionally speaking, is not a majority rules body right now. It is a body that requires some kind of supermajority to get most things done, and that includes signing off on the nominations of the president for appointments to different positions in regulatory agencies. Same thing is true for appointments to be judges or ambassadors or U.S. attorneys, the chief prosecutors, or U.S. marshals. But we're focusing on the regulators now, and the Senate can block those nominations, and increasingly in recent years they have. So that if a minority party is quite determined, they can chew up a lot of hours, as the graphic over here shows, and I'll circle it. As the graphic over here shows, if a minority party is really determined, you can burn up more hours than there are available in the entire working calendar for the Senate, just waiting around to take cloture votes on these nominations. A cloture vote would be a vote by the majority of 60 to go forward despite the objections of the smaller group of 40 senators. So at any rate, what's happened in recent years is fewer and fewer presidential nominees actually taking office. Most recently, not so much based objections to the individual nominee, so who's working below the level of the top political leadership? These folks who are most of the employees of a given regulatory agency. I want to give you a little history here. Early in our nation's history, the idea was that there would be complete rotation in office, or complete turnover from top to bottom in government after every election. So when a new president was elected, the new president would fire every postmaster and every inspector for the customs department, and Treasury employees up and down the line lost their jobs because all of them were patronage employees of the prior president and that president's party. The positive spin on this is what we call Jacksonian democracy, and the idea that that the government will always be very responsive to the current wishes of the people. The negative spin on this is to the victor belong the spoils, as our statue here of Andrew Jackson puts it. To the victors belong the spoils, and that starts to take on a bit of a corrupt connotation. The idea that government employees are in it just for the money. They are only there to benefit from the salary that they won through working hard in the president's campaign. So we've over time moved away from this model of political responsiveness, or to the victors belong the spoils, to one of more insulated civil service. Under our current system, most of those of the agency employees who work below the level of the top political leadership are long-term, career-long professionals, and many of them work for the civil service. A few others are what are called exempt employees, but let's focus on the civil service. The civil service grew out of a national tragedy, the 1881 assassination of President James Garfield by this guy, this crazy office seeker. And I say crazy because he was mentally ill. And in this case, encountered the president, had been writing to him asking for an office, was not getting replies, thought that this was entirely inappropriate of the president to ignore his letters, and so tracked him down in a courthouse in Buffalo and shot him. This created some serious soul searching in the country about the nature of staffing government offices. We also noticed at that time that we were out of step with a number of other Western democracies. And so at that point, we got the Civil Service Act. Under this Civil Service Act system, what we aim for is a professionalized bureaucracy, and that's a goal that emphasizes technical competence of the employees. So beneath the very thin layer of political leadership laid on top of a regulatory agency at the start of a new presidential administration, down below that are the people who are there. I was there with the previous president. I'm there with this president. I'll be here when the next president comes along, and I'll be working on this agency's job. So there's a great deal of continuity to the work of regulatory agencies, despite big rhetoric about reinvigorating agencies or deregulating or cutting back or changing. It's an awfully big ship, and it's awfully slow to turn around. There's just a lot of momentum built into this professionalized civil service. And this is not out of a sense of willful ignoring of political leadership. It's just that each of the employees is focused in on the mission of the agency and their piece of it in a technical sense. And they, tend to respect the new priorities of the new political leadership who come in. Political scientists who have studied this have been very interested to see how faithfully the professional bureaucracy carry out the priorities. But it's just that there's such big protean organizations with so many people doing things that it's awfully hard to change a lot of things profoundly very quickly in these agencies. Also notice that this practice of very stable administration of passed laws through the regulatory agencies, not just the U.S. see this all over the world. Having said all this about the professionalism and the insulation from politics of a great many of the civil servants who work in regulatory agencies, I want you to keep this in perspective. All of this technical competence and distance from politics is balanced off against the forces we talked about earlier that keep the agency very aware, very alive of the current political realities and the priorities of the people. So political responsiveness is always balanced off against professionalism and technical competence. And really one of the central tasks of administrative law is to try to reach some kind of balance between those two values. So the budgetary process with Congress keeps the agency alive and aware of the political realities, and the appointment process and the selection of leadership from the White House with Senate confirmation also keeps the agencies aware of current political priorities and makes them responsive directly to the voters. So there's this balance between the technical, professional side and the political responsiveness side. We talked about the regulators coming into the job, where they come from, how they get appointed. Let's talk a little bit now about what happens when regulators leave the agency. Now, at the top level, we've already talked about presidential removal, but what about the civil servants? What happens when they leave? Well, think about where they're probably going. I mean, some will just retire after spending, years, perhaps a whole career at the agency. But others will be going out into private industry. Where will their skills and expertise be most valuable? Among the very firms that the agency has been regulating. So, if you're an expert in nuclear power, then you'll probably go from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to work for Duke Energy or some other, private company that is involved in nuclear power. That's where your expertise will apply. It makes sense. There is some concern in this setting about what is often called the revolving door. So the concern here is that while people are, at the agency doing their work regulating private companies, they might pull their punches. They might do things that will, or they might avoid doing things that will displease potential future employers. So people worry a little bit about the incentives there. It's hard to judge exactly how much that actually affects decisions, but people recognize the unfortunate incentives at work there. If you have a revolving door of employees leaving the agency and going out into the private sector, well, it can operate in reverse, right? So if you're the agency hiring new employees and you need expertise, where are you going to find it? Probably among people who are currently working in the private firms in the industry. So if you're looking around for people with nuclear engineering credentials, you're probably going to be looking at private firms in the energy sector to hire for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So that over the course of a career, somebody with expertise in the industry may go to the agency, spend a few years there, go out into private industry, then turn around and take a new job, perhaps higher up in the agency, and then back out into private sector. So that's where we get the image of the revolving door. Now, this revolving door phenomenon is part of a larger set of concerns about the, quote, capture of agencies. And the idea here is that over time, agencies just become more comfortable, more cozy, more dependent on the very firms that they are supposed to regulate. There's a bit of a life cycle theory here for agencies. Agencies in their youth, when they're first created by Congress, are thought to be kind of brash, adolescent, vigorous. They take on all comers and they don't worry about the consequences. But as an agency sort of settles into middle age or old age, then it may become a little less energetic, a little more willing to look the other way sometimes, and perhaps just get a little too comfortable with its surroundings and with its neighbors. That is the targets, the firms that are the targets of its regulatory responsibilities. So those are the high points I want you to think about when it comes to who are these regulators. Both the regulators at the top of the regulatory agencies, the political appointees who come and go, and then the full-time professional civil servants that provide that counterbalancing source of stability and technical expertise to balance off against the political responsiveness of the leadership. So now on to the question of what the regulators do.